Does your job hunt need a little more zen? If so, you've come to the right place. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Game Industry Job Hunt Podcast, episode 10. We made it to 10, guys. Woohoo! High fives and cheers all around. Hey, listen, glad you're joining us for this one. I'm really, really excited about this one. I've been waiting to talk to this gentleman for a long time, and I finally bugged him enough to where he just finally agreed to sit down and have a chat with me, which I will be forever grateful to him for. I'm, of course, talking about Chris Tran. Chris is a game industry career coach, and he just has all kinds of incredible insight, so I'm really excited for you guys to hear it. Really quick before we do, thank you for listening. Leave a review for the show here on the podcast app of your choice. It doesn't have to be anything fancy or complicated. 5 stars is enough. Hopefully we're worth 5 stars, I guess you be the judge, but I think we are. Anyway, here's my conversation with Chris Tran. All right, sweet. There we go. Hot mics. Yeah, cool. So I guess to sort of get this kicked off, Chris, thank you again for being on the show. And like I was telling you a few minutes ago, I've really been looking forward to talking to you for a while now. You're one of many people that I've had on the list to be a guest on the show almost since the beginning, probably. So it's really nice to have you on finally. It's really great.
It's an honor to be here, and I'll be honest, I think that we need more voices talking about how professionals in the gaming industry just need more agency. I think that right now we are all at the mercy of shareholders. Nothing wrong with being shareholders, but there's also, they got to leave room for the little guy to live, breathe, eat, and spend for their little ones. And so I think that the more voices that we have to give fellow gaming professionals agency, create leverage, and also just have plans to take action, the better. So I'm also grateful that you are and adding as yet another voice, but we don't have enough voices in the podcasting world. So thank you.
Yeah, no, hey, thank you for saying that. That's exactly what I'm trying to do here is just sort of, take the things that I'm learning day to day and then just share them with people as much as possible. So I think that's great. But yeah, I mean, to kind of kick things off, how did you get into coaching anyway? How did you get into games anyway? Kind of give me the Chris Tran origin story.
This is a point in the story where my wife would kick me underneath the table and try to prevent me from rambling. Right? I think that my origin story has maybe 2 parts into gaming. The first part is I was an immigrant kid. I was born in America, but my parents didn't teach me English, which meant that when I went to school, I didn't speak English. The teachers thought that I had a mental disability, right? I'm not quite sure what the correct word is, but they put me in a class where it was not, where they didn't think that there was a lot of potential in me.
That's wild.
And so I was able to connect with other kids through computer. During recess, I would steal all the other computers and put them into the music room and load up on 5.25-inch floppy disks, old school Apple II games like Serpentine or Karateka or Choplifter, if you remember any of those, and then Squirrely and Gen Z. So that is how I first got into games, where my English wasn't good enough to carry me across the bridge, but the ability to hustle and bring people together via games did. And through that, I was able to really learn how to program in assembly at a very young age. Just to show off, it never did anything for my academic career. In university, I was a solid C+ student, so do not take any study tips from me. But that's how I found that gaming was something that was really important to me, because it made me less lonely. It literally made me less lonely, and also gave me self-worth to say, hey, just because I couldn't speak English didn't make me, let's call it, unredeemable, right? I could be a positive member of society, and that's how my first step of my origin story went. Now, stage 2. Almost 10 years ago, I was the owner of an advertising agency, and not really loving life. I think that there's only so many times when you can spin selling Coca-Cola as something that makes people fundamentally happy. This was back when Coca-Cola's big motto was, "We are the happiness factory," and I was anything but. So I what I call my Doctor Strange phase, where I went to Nepal to just get away from it all and go hiking. And lo and behold, I got caught in an earthquake where 9,000 people died. I did not, but I was thought dead for a while. I was for 4 or 5 days living on the streets, sleeping on the streets, hustling for food, getting water from the Red Cross and whatnot. And when I
Wow.
came out of that experience, I don't have very clear memories of that experience because, you know, stuff happened, but I realized I did not want to have my story end as somebody who was chasing the dollar and doing something that he was very cynical about. And so I just walked away from my advertising company. And lo and behold, at the same time, Riot Games was hiring for a country manager of Vietnam. And so here I was entering the age of 40, and which means that I'm entering the age of 50 this year, wanting to get into gaming. Gaming was something that was very important to me. Gaming gave me value and gave me an identity, yet no professional experience in gaming. And here who was I to apply to one of the most prestigious and competitive gaming companies in the world to be head of one of their biggest markets? Because back then, Vietnam's League of Legends server was actually the second biggest server in the world.
I believe it.
Yeah. And so I had a problem. I had a problem because I was a person who had deep desire but did not look like somebody who could do the job. And so I had to reforge myself. And so that journey for me was hiring a graphic designer to design my resume, not based on a template that I found on the internet, but what we thought would be eye-catching and based around the corporate identity of Riot Games. I hired a PR agency to teach me how to handle hostile interviews when they would just take pot shots at me saying, hey, why am I wasting their time when I'm obviously not a gamer or a gaming professional or not skilled enough for this interview? I hired 2 research agents to give me my own bespoke research on the Vietnamese game industry so that when I was interviewed, not only could I portray myself as an expert, I knew things that nobody else on the planet knew about Vietnam because I spent my own money to make it happen. I even went so far as to think that there would be a 1v1 tournament between me and the other candidates to see who would be the best League of Legends player who would be qualified to work at League of Legends. And in so doing, I hired a gaming coach to teach me how to play League of Legends better. Be that as it may, after 13 rounds of interviews across 9 months, I finally got into Riot Games and realized that I may have over-prepared, but I will never know.
Dude, listen, you this sounds so familiar to my backstory, just in everything I was thinking. And I mean, really quick, it's funny because I think there are so many people that are worried about those kinds of interviews, right? They're worried that, oh man, I'm going to sit down and they're going to be like, what are you doing here? Why are we interviewing you? You know? And I just think it's wild that you hired a PR firm to put you through that. That's wild.
Yeah, I decided that if I was going to go for it, I would go for it and leave nothing back.
Yeah.
I would, what was it? Was it they say, if you come after the king, you best not miss?
Yep. Yeah.
So I did everything I could so I wouldn't miss.
Dude, I love that.
And 13 rounds of interviews later, over 9 months, I made it happen. I somehow was able to join Riot. And that was an amazing journey ever since. So
over that
is my journey into gaming, sir.
Over that 9-month period, was Riot the only studio that you were talking to, or were you just going through your own game industry job hunt, just seeing, applying where you could and figuring things out, or was it just Riot from day one? This is the goal. This is what I'm going to make it happen.
This is one of those do as I say, don't do as I do. But I only had Riot in my sight.
Yeah.
Honestly, my backup plan was I was going to go join my friend's nonprofit school in South Africa and teach kids in rural South Africa for a while just to find meaning in my life.
That's okay.
And honest to God truth, that was my backup plan.
That's okay, because I was the same way. I mean, I've told the story, my backstory on the podcast a few times, but when I started out at Gearbox, it was the exact same thing for me. Was a lot of imposter syndrome. Just look, I've never done this before. I have no experience in the video games industry. Why in the world are they going to want to hire me? You know, why in the world are they going to want to even talk to me? And then I did a similar thing where I made like a little, I went to the craft store and bought a wooden box and a bunch of paint, and I made a little loot chest resume box, and I redid my resume in Photoshop with like, you know, blood splatter and Borderlands branding and Gearbox branding, and I sent that to him, and that got my foot in the door. I don't know. I mean, this might be a good question for you. Like, do you think that kind of thing, do you think the way that we did that, sort of the visual elements, do you think you could do that today? Do you think that would work today in 2025?
Great question.
I wonder.
I think the meta has changed. Me, as being one of the industry graybeards, I remember when I would have to apply for a job and go to Kinko's and buy really expensive printer paper, like 14-gram Egyptian cotton, you know, like white but not too white, yellow but not too yellow, like that great Constitution quality paper to make something happen. And so I was kind of shaped like that. I have seen some really nice looking resumes, and I've seen some really loud, obnoxious resumes, and I think design and taste is something that can be effective if you know what you're doing. Yeah. Yet I feel that sometimes clip art and Clippy, the Microsoft Word avatar, and Comic Sans, etc., like I have seen things that just don't look professional. I think that if you know what you're doing, or if you hire somebody, then it can make an impact. But so often, good intentions end up with bad results because people don't go all the way and think that they can be cute.
Yeah.
And there's like a huge difference between being gimmicky and having a well thought out design. And for me, I shelled out money to make it happen. And if you look at it, it's not a really bright or garish thing. It looks like a polished piece of corporate
really quick
communications.
Really quick, I know obviously our listeners can't see this, but I want to show you, because I have it right here in reach. I want to show you this resume, and I want your honest. Again, the resume works, so no hurt feelings. But I want to know if this falls into the garish category for you. Just hold on. Here we go. Check this thing out. I think that's actually the cover letter. That's the cover letter. Hold on a second.
That's the cover letter.
I don't want to edit out the paper rustling either, guys. Okay, so if we have any, here we go. Okay, here we go. This is page 1. Two pages, of course. We had to do 2 pages.
I think the red's a bit much, but everything else looks pretty okay to me.
I've got to post this on the website.
Significant umbrage against 2-page resumes.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at all the wasted space.
Big issues with 2-page resumes.
Look at all the wasted space. I've got my profile, and then my really oddly spaced out experience here. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Again, it worked for me, but I personally am skeptical as to whether or not that is an effective strategy anymore, really, mainly because people are so distributed now. Like, who are you going to ship it to and know that it's going to get there and know that they're going to see it? It feels like there are so many more variables now that I don't think something like this would be as effective as it was. Although I will say, I think that idea is very sad. It's very sad to me if that's true, and I hope I'm wrong. I would love to see somebody try something like this again and prove me wrong and say, hey, no, man, I just found a job 3 months ago doing something similar. Here's the story. So if that's you and you're listening, hit me and Chris up on LinkedIn and show us, a picture of the resume or something, because I know I would love to see that.
I think when you go hard on design, I think that you are putting more up on chance than you need to, because I believe in a 10-second resume.
Yeah, and you're taking away from your experience too, right?
Yeah. But in that 10 seconds, if somebody says, oh, I don't like that specific design choice, they're not even looking at your experience. They're just like hit in the face with this thing. And they, for whatever reason, they're personally offended by whatever design consideration you've had. Then they won't even get to your name. And that is a shame.
Yeah.
But sometimes if you hit the right person in the right day with the right mood that happens to like that kind of taste, then you rocket to the head of a pile. So it is, a crapshoot.
It's a gamble for sure.
Gosh, if we lived in a world where you could submit 3 or 4 resumes and A/B test the crap out of it, then heck yeah. But I'm not sure if we're at that point yet. I can see it coming. But I don't think we're there yet.
Probably not. No, yeah. I don't know. I hope somebody will prove me wrong on that theory, but I'm not really sure that would work now. I don't know. I want to go back to something else that you said that is just, again, like you continue to prove to be one of the most fascinating dudes that I've talked to. And to the extent that you are comfortable, I would love to know more about the Doctor Strange phase, because again, the earthquake notwithstanding, that's just insane. The idea of going to Nepal and hiking and just doing that kind of thing seems extreme in a sense, but I mean, but there's also this simplicity about it. You know what I mean? That it just, like, it makes sense to me, and I'd love to know more about that. What sort of gave you the idea to do that? What sort of drove you to make that decision, and then what was that trip like? Like, what was that phase like?
Yeah, great question. I realized in talking about it, I think that there were probably 3 phases of my life where I was kind of like that. I think that there is the Doctor Strange phase, which I've talked to you about in Nepal.
Yeah.
But I also had a Bruce Banner phase, and I had a Bridgerton phase, and I'll identify just very quickly. The Bruce Banner phase was when my father passed away 20 years ago, and I had quit my consulting job to be home with him, and when he lost his fight with cancer, I liquidated a lot of my earthly possessions because I thought if I died tomorrow, what would I regret not doing? And so I decided to go be a farmer in Japan for 3 months. And I just wandered the countryside of Japan being a farmer.
Dude, I love that.
And I like to think of it as the Bruce Banner phase, because I would just like wander around, show up at people's farms and say, hey, I'm a pretty strong guy. I don't need much. Just give me a corner of your barn or loft or what have you, and I'll sleep with your dog, and then chase ducks and cut trees down in forests and do whatever you need to. And just was able to get quiet and think about what was really important. And the Bridgerton phase was when I left Riot. I left Riot 3 years ago, and I had the intention of retiring early, Joe. I had been a good squirrel and put enough acorns for a long winter. Probably the long winter that was foretold in a Game of Thrones. And I thought, okay, well, I have all this time. What am I going to do? And then I was overwhelmed with nothing to do. So I spent a month watching Bridgerton on heavy repeat, because that was how I got away from the world.
Yeah.
And it's silly and it's simple. But before I could have these great bursts of creativity or productivity, I needed to rest. I needed to be quiet. And sure, it sounds extreme, but we live in a day and age where we are buffeted by all of these signals that we do not intend to have in our lives, like intrusive advertising, social media. As good or bad a force, it is what has brought us here together today, but it can also be bad. During COVID, my Riot team, I would argue with them and tell them to uninstall Slack from their phones. And they would fight me, and they would say, why? I'm like, because you are at home. Your computer is at home. You're not getting out of your apartment or your house or what have you. You do not need to have Slack on your phone. You need to be able to walk away from your computer and have some peace of mind. And they would always fight me. They would say, well, what if you need us? And I'm like, I'll be okay between the times when you're not at your computer. I think we'll be okay. Right. And I still have your phone number if I need to call.
Yeah.
But you don't need to be checking Slack when you wake up. You don't need to be checking Slack. And so it does seem extreme, but we forget that we are already in an extreme place the opposite way. Right?
Yeah.
And so for me, Bruce Banner, period in Japan, farmer, then that kicked off a 10-year journey in Vietnam where I was an advertising person. It culminated in me being burnt out a bit, but I had a great career in advertising for 10 years. And then I went to Nepal and was Doctor Strange. And then after that, I came out, and then I was a gaming guy. And I was a pretty good gaming guy with a pretty good company building some amazing properties, entertaining and inspiring millions of people across the Asia and Pacific region. And then I had my Bridgerton phase, tongue in cheek, but because of that, I came out the other side and I thought, well, all this pain and experience needs to mean something. And so that's when I became a coach, so that all of the things I've experienced, not just as a gamer, not as somebody at Riot, but also as an advertising guy, as somebody who's a consultant, as somebody who's worked in Thailand and Vietnam and Switzerland and London and Toronto and Philadelphia and Boston and Kansas City and Montgomery, Alabama for people. All of this stuff can help people avoid the pain that I did and get to where they need to go faster and with less stress, because gosh, there's just so much pain and stress out there that why not? And so I'm tongue in cheek about Bridgerton, but Bridgerton was one of the things that gave me space to come up with a new solution or a new vision for my life. Though I'm really scared about the next season of Bridgerton because I've heard bad rumors. That's between me and was it Shonda Rhimes? Is that the producer?
I don't know.
Bridgerton?
Maybe is that a Shonda? Is that a Shonda joint? It might be. I'm not sure. My wife and I watched season 1 of Bridgerton, a couple few years ago, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was cool. But now you've got me thinking of what are my phases? I can remember I had one back in 2021 probably. There was something happening with work or with life or something. I can't remember what, but it was just causing some stress. And I remember I dove headfirst into Parks and Rec. And so when you started talking about your Bridgerton phase, that was kind of that's the first one that came to mind for me, was my Parks and Rec phase there for a while. And those are funny. I mean, it really is true. It's like, it's funny how you can sort of look back and label certain points of your life, certain phases of your life with the media you were consuming, like the TV shows you were watching, the music you were listening to, video games you were playing, things like that. It's just really funny how that works. You said something else in there too that provides a really great segue that I'm now officially ruining by calling it a segue, but you really are a font of awesome insights on LinkedIn. And by the way, I would encourage anybody listening that doesn't already follow Chris on LinkedIn, make sure you do so ASAP. Tons of great advice, insights, wisdom, whatever you need, he's got it. But you posted something, when was it? I think this was a few days ago, that resonated with me in a big way, and you just sort of touched on it, and it was the idea of basically you're making the point that we shouldn't feel guilty for not grinding 24/7, and we shouldn't feel like we need to always be plugged in. You had a really great quote there. The rest isn't the enemy of productivity, it's the fuel. And I think as I've gotten older, it has gotten easier for me to do that, to unplug a little bit, to start seeing the forest for the trees, as it were, in terms of the work can wait, like you said. Maybe you don't need Slack on your phone. Maybe it's just okay for you to not answer that email or that message until you're back at your computer tomorrow. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I guess it depends on the importance of the message, but that's all relative. But anyway, talk about that a little bit. Talk about that idea that for those listening that may struggle with that, what's your advice to them on how they can sort of combat that feeling of just needing to be on all the time?
Gaming is a funny industry in that we all are not just the producer, we're the consumer as well. We're passionate about it. And heck, this is a dream career for almost all of us, me included. And so when we get there, we want to do everything. The lines between work and life blur very much, so that one becomes another. How many times have I been in a situation where after working at Riot, I would block out my significant other and say, oh, I need to play League of Legends because it's part of my job, or I need to watch an esports game because it's part of my job, etc. And it's very easy to fall in the trap saying, hey, I want to honor my dream, therefore I will let it consume every single part, right? But we are not Tinder to be consumed. We are not oranges to be squeezed. And I think that's really important to think about. I remember one morning I was at the office at 7:30 in the morning because I was virtue signaling and also trying to work really hard and also kind of neg my coworkers and showcase. And I'm very sanguine about it. I'm not proud, but that's who I was. And then like at 8:30 when my next coworker comes in, she's like, well, how long have you been here? And I'm like, an hour, just being bright and chirpy and trying to just like virtue signal and show off that I'm such a hard worker. And she's just look at me like, it's just a job, man. And I remember that quite well, and we're very close friends. And that is an issue that is an absolute issue because we think our managers and leaders about perfect attendance. They really don't. They really absolutely don't. What they care about is the impact that you drive, and their memory is short. It is more effective for you to manage your career if you understand that you're measured not by the hours that you spend or the days that you sit in a chair, but rather how many players play the game, how many hours they're engaged, the D1, D7, D14 retention rates, monetization rates, all of the numbers that help people know if a game is entertaining and doing the job it's supposed to. And when you're able to have a clarity on that, then you realize that all this other stuff doesn't matter. And you learn how to prioritize. Prioritize not just what you're supposed to do, but what you're not supposed to do. Because one of the things that I really trumpet and the drum that I wish I had a bigger stick to beat on is that prioritization isn't what you say yes to. It's that you say no to every friggin' thing else.
Yeah.
And that includes things that prevent you from taking the time off because you are not an orange to be squeezed. You are not supposed to be on the treadmill. We're in a creative industry. And if we were in an assembly line thing, yes, sure. And I say that with the utmost respect to people who work in factories. My mother worked in a canning company. She worked in, funny enough, a Pepsi canning company. And I and my brother spent many a summer working at local Burger King, so we know what productivity is on the front line in blue collar kind of situations. But you are not effective if you are not taking time off. Not only that, you are being toxic and making it harder for other people to care for themselves. All of this friction with good intentions, but poor understanding of what the job is, just pulls us all down and creates a toxic work environment that nobody, not our managers, our leaders, our shareholders want, because that just distracts us from the win condition, the only win condition that we can all celebrate.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I also felt that way, and I think it was most prevalent for me in my career around my first job at Gearbox, because again, like you said, we get these roles, and it's kind of surreal there for a good long while. You're kind of like, did this really work out? For me, that was the case. I was sort of trying to figure out how did I swing this? Like, how did I make this happen? And I think that, I know for me, there was always this feeling of, okay, well, I think on some level in my brain, I assumed this would be my only job in games. I would eventually, they would eventually wise up and they'd be like, get out of here. And then I would have to go find a job doing something else somewhere else. It never occurred to me, honestly, that I was making friends and contacts and things even then that were going to help me find my next job in games, which it did, and so on and so forth. And now, I've been in the industry for 10 years. So I think that understanding of the importance of unplugging, and to your point, the importance of how it can ultimately affect others around you by not doing it, I think it does come with age and experience and maturity. And so if you happen to be somebody that's listening to this and you feel that way and you're in your first job in the industry or whatever, don't sweat it. It'll pass. Learn what you need to learn now, get great at your job, and eventually there will come a day where you'll sort of look back and say, oh yeah, I haven't felt that way in a while. Well, when did that stop? When did that end? And it goes away eventually. So
this brings two things to mind for me. At Riot, we are pretty well known for having unlimited PT. Yet, I noted when looking at the statistics, because numbers drive the narrative sometimes, that my team was pretty bad at taking PTO. So I had a survey among my team and I asked them, how many days of PTO are justified for a year? And let me ask you a quick question, Joe. What do you think was the lowest number that people came across?
I can see the lowest number being 0, but I think realistically, I would say I would go with sort of the assumed norm and say 14 days. 5.
Somebody told me 5.
Yeah.
And there were other people who said 32.
Wow.
And I really went hard on the team saying 5 is just not reasonable.
Yeah.
5 is wrong. And so then as a result of that, I instituted minimum PTO. So what I would do is I set the minimum PTO for a year was 20, and every quarter I would expect everybody to take at least 5 days of PTO, and then I would name and shame people who took less than the minimum because it was unlimited.
I love it, dude.
You take more than 20 days of PTO, then you're helping us, right?
Yeah,
and I think that
absolutely.
it's really important for people to understand that if a manager sees a toxic situation, they have to be very proactive and firm to diffuse the situation. And you bet your bippy, I was the leader of the pack in taking PTO because I had to set a good example for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not a bad thing to want to set an example in, right? You know, like, hey, that's good. That's a good thing. I guess this kind of ties into this conversation sort of. As we record this today, there are still even more layoffs here in February of 2025. WB Games laid off and closed several studios, and it's just another gut punch to the whole industry. Monolith Studios is included in that, unfortunately, really storied studio. And then there are lots of rumors swirling around about NetEase right now preparing for layoffs, and it just seems like new layoffs are being announced every day. I think I mentioned this to you before we started recording, but when I got laid off last May, I actually got lucky because the lead that I had at the time gave me a month's heads up. He sort of said, hey, look, there's nothing certain yet, but I'm hearing rumors of layoffs, and I would suggest that you just go ahead and update the resume, start looking, and then if it doesn't happen, great. If it happens and you don't get hit, great. But if it does happen and you do get hit, you'll be glad you got a head start, you know? And so that was incredible of him to do that. Of course, it made for a pretty stressful month, but I found that when the time did come, there was a lot of, it wasn't nearly as stressful as it would have been because I knew it was coming, and I had already gotten started. It allowed me to be a lot more laid back in the actual call because, the person that was having to do this was my boss, my marketing director, who liked me a lot and I liked him. And I knew that he took absolutely no pleasure in this and it was horrible for him. So it somehow allowed me to make it easier on myself and on him in some weird way, which I felt like was good. But I am curious, if there are other people out there that are lucky like I was, and they are getting some kind of a heads up that, hey, layoff could be coming. They feel like a layoff is imminent for whatever reason. What would your advice to them be to prepare? Like, how can you get ready for this kind of thing when you suspect that it's coming?
Look, Joe, I have been laid off twice in my life, and I have been part of the planning of at least 3 layoffs directly. And I think in this day and age, it would be irresponsible if people didn't prepare to be laid off. Regardless if you sensed it or not, these are no regret moves. And that is absolute truth because we cannot predict what happens tomorrow, let alone, in an hour. The floor falls out from under you when you get that, oh, we got to talk message from HR.
Exactly.
The same way when you get the we gotta talk message from your high school sweetheart or what have you. So I implore everybody to just prepare because right now the most important thing is for people to understand how to get leverage on the job market. If you do not have a updated resume, update it and have other people look at it because I guarantee whatever resume you have is not adequate to the job.
Yes.
What resume format you had that got you the job that you have now doesn't work anymore.
Yep.
Network up. You need to understand who your allies are and just touch base with them before you need to look. Because if you're only reaching out to people when you already need a job, then it is harder. It is harder. The best time to build a network is when you don't need it. It is one of those things like that French saying. The best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. The second best time to do it now.
I think about that saying all the time, man. I really do.
Relationships to mature.
Yeah.
Right? And 3 is have a financial planning session with your dependents or just by yourself or with your best friend if you're by yourself so that you can really understand if you are laid off, how long you can go. Because, I don't know, it's really funny. I have a friend who has a zombie apocalypse go bag, but does not have a layoff preparation plan. And I'm like, what makes you think that zombies are more likely than,
Yeah,
than getting laid off?
man, that's
And he's
so
like,
funny.
yeah.
Yeah, you have a zombie apocalypse. I mean, I can understand, having things around for emergencies, and we all have that. But yeah, when you put it that way, it's just funny. It's like, why do you think a zombie apocalypse is more likely than a layoff?
Yeah, and you rationalize it like it's not really a zombie apocalypse. What if COVID comes back? What if like there's a junta or a coup or whatever? And I'm like, yeah, I get it, but these are all like 0.01% chances one layoff thing. It's like going to the gym. You're never gonna regret going to the gym.
Yeah.
And these are things like every single blessed person out there needs to prepare.
Yeah. If COVID does come back, you're going to be looking at a layoff probably anyway.
Or bird flu.
Or anything, yeah. While we're sort of just going over your LinkedIn post, let's go over every single one here. We'll just give them all a rating. But there was another one that again, I think is, I'm kidding, of course. But there is another one that jumped out to me as I was sort of getting ready to talk to you. And that is the one that you did actually earlier today, I believe, about imposter syndrome. And we were talking a lot about that earlier too, about especially for me in that first role, there was a lot of imposter syndrome. I don't belong here. I shouldn't be here. How did I even swing this? Any minute they're going to walk into the room and they're going to say, hey, I thought we fired you ages ago. Get out of here, and that's almost never going to happen. So, what's your advice on imposter syndrome, dealing with it, recognizing it?
I feel like imposter syndrome is one of the easiest excuses people give themselves to not act. Right? It's just like a fundamental feeling that I'm not good enough, or I will prepare, be good enough, and always be training. And I see that with I see that in everybody who is saying, oh, I'm not going to apply for that job, and instead I'm going to sign up for one more Udemy course, or I'm going to work on my portfolio, etc.
Yeah.
And sure, these are useful, but it's not the most direct way to get to where they want, because they think that they are not good enough. And maybe they are, maybe they are not, but they are assuming they are not good enough, and therefore, without being brave and courageous and stepping into the arena, they just prepare for a future, or like I sometimes say, they over-engineer for a hypothetical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right? Absolutely.
They're always building for this image of something that they think they're not good enough, when lo and behold, what they're not good enough at isn't their hard skill. Not that they're not good enough an engineer or a designer or an artist, but they're not a good enough network. They're not a good enough resume writer. They're not a good enough interviewer. And so they spend so much time working on the wrong thing and continue and compound. And over time, as they still struggle because their resume is still subpar, or their interview skills are not hitting their mark, but they think that it's because something intrinsically is wrong with them, their confidence just gets destroyed, and they struggle like, like a fish in a net, just getting more and more tangled in their own narrative of how they're not good enough, when the people who are getting the opportunities are the people who take a step back and not struggle. Hey, maybe that Einstein guy had something right about saying, repeating the same actions and expecting different results is a form of insanity. And so imposter syndrome fuels procrastination. Imposter syndrome fuels self-rejection. And I would rather people reject me so that I could know for certain what I need to work on, versus assuming by default I am no good. Now, that is hard. That is hard because we live in a world where we are, again, under assault. We are buffeted by stories of the job market being hard, right? We are buffeted by the fact that there are layoffs all the time. And every day I see unfortunate stories of people who are searching for jobs and who've been laid off, etc. And sometimes LinkedIn feels like the world's biggest pity party, not because anybody wants it, because people are authentically and truly in pain. The thing that imposter syndrome causes is that suddenly you project other people's pain and let their narratives become your narrative. And that is the biggest danger, because you are you and they are they, and you need to learn that you can be empathetic to somebody else, but also say, nah, that ain't me, man. I can feel bad for them, but I'm a great artist, designer, engineer, community manager, marketer, BD person, widget engineer, what have you. And that is tough. That is a skill that we are never taught, right? That our own self image of the values and impact that we have has to be strong. And again, you're not going to get that image by going back into the workshop and studying up for the next certification. That won't do it. You have to go out into the market and validate what you're worth, what you're needing, what you're lacking, and then validate, validate, validate. And that is how you crush imposter syndrome, by not running from it, but facing it straight on. And I don't know, pulling a reverse Merlin Balrog instead of saying, "Thou shalt not pass," saying, "Heck yeah, I'm passing."
Yeah.
Go and try and stop me, Balrog. Maybe go ahead and try to stop me, Merlin. I'm not sure if I'm the Balrog or Merlin or Gandalf.
Gandalf, yeah.
Wow, I just committed
It's
a
whatever.
massive faux
It's
pas.
whatever.
Right? in this thing.
I'm not gonna. It's not a Lord of the Rings podcast, Chris.
Some
I'm
wizard,
not mad.
funky-headed wizard.
I'm not mad at
Dumbledore. You know, when Dumbledore fired the phaser at the Death Star, you know?
I think the way you talk about imposter syndrome is really interesting, because even the way that I frame the question sort of implies my viewpoint on it as it's a thing that is happening to me, you know? And after you answering that, it's not a thing that just happens to you. Like, it's a weakness that is there, just like any other weakness that you have to find a way to get past and move on from.
Empathy is a power. Empathy is what connects us.
Yeah.
Yet, undirected empathy can become troubling because we lose our own self-identity if we just say, "Oh, it's a tough job market, therefore it must be hard for me to get a job. Therefore I shouldn't try. Therefore," and it's just therefores on all the way down, like turtles all the way. You have to stop it by saying, "Yeah, the job market is tough. Therefore, I'm going to do everything I can, and I have unique things that other people don't have. And if people understand how uniquely qualified I am at doing this, then I will have a better than average chance of making something happen." Bar none, this is the most important piece of feedback I give anybody I talk to, because everybody finds solace in being part of the teeming masses, but really that solace is an excuse saying, "Hey, I'm a statistic." Nobody's a statistic. Everybody is a unique person that it has something to offer, but we're not used to saying that. We play it safe. By playing it safe, we learn helplessness. We learn despair. By default, that is not who we are. Yet, again, this incessant yammering on LinkedIn trains us that we are supposed to be sorrowful and lucky for every little bit of good luck that we have. And that is why I like to think of myself as old man yelling at lawn energy. Like I am one of the older people in the gaming industry, and sometimes I do feel like I'm Abe Simpson with the newspaper, remembering
Yeah.
like the good old times when when we were on stagecoaches and whatnot. So yeah.
So even with all the myriad amazing advice you've given us tonight, what would you say if you had one piece of just like holy grail, boils it down to the root of it, advice for people? What do you think that would be?
Ask for help, guys. Just friggin' ask for help and be as vulnerable as you can with whoever you trust. Because it's isolating and lonely when you're out there trying to figure out how to get your next job or your first job, how to get into the industry, how to get a promotion when you've been overlooked. It's lonely, and it's so easy to feel disempowered. It doesn't need to be a coach. It doesn't need to be me. But so many people, we feel like we are failures, and we are embarrassed, and we are ashamed to share our struggle. And again, that is the imposter syndrome, saying, "Hey, we're not supposed to struggle." No, we're struggling because it's hard. But if you struggle alone, then you will not be able to see what you cannot see. Your blind spots become apparent. And if you're alone, it's very hard to pull yourself up out of despair and helplessness. And having a good friend and an ally, and I talk about this with a lot of my clients, that it feels like trench warfare. It really does. And you need somebody to be there with you back to back, hand to hand combat so that when you are asleep, somebody's awake, keeping an eye out for things and vice versa. And that is just another analogy for the blind spot. If you think you can think yourself out of imposter syndrome alone, you're a better person than me, and I salute you. But I think learned helplessness, imposter syndrome, the quickest way is to have vulnerable, protected conversations with your allies, be it your mentor, your coach, your best friend, your loved ones, etc. And if you don't have that, get that quick.
Man, it is though. It's so hard to ask for help, and I think it's just so simple, but it's so hard. It's really hard to do that. It can be really hard. Try to find the right circumstance and the right person to just reach out, and it really does make it a lot easier. It really does. Chris, one final question for you here as we wrap it up. What's the biggest mistake that you see job hunters making right now, and what can they do to fix that?
Every resume I've seen is a terrible resume. I've seen thousands of them, and every resume is a terrible resume. Every resume is one that is the journey that every resume writer has, is that they go on the internet and they look for a resume template and they think something looks kind of cool and they fill it out with their Mad Libs kind of thing, and they say, because I found it on the internet, therefore it is a good resume, and they put no thought beyond that. It is a design problem. You need to understand what the resume is supposed to do, which is not get you a job. A resume is just to get you an interview, and understand what a recruiter is looking for. And so the biggest mistake people do is they take the most important artifact in their job hunting search, which is a resume, and just sleepwalk through it. So my advice, or the biggest mistake, is people are sleepwalking through it. And my advice is really apply that great, marvelous brain that you have and apply it as a design problem, and try to understand the psychology of what a recruiter is going through and how they're selecting, not give you a job, because no resume on earth will be so good that you get a job from it. All you can do is hope to get it into a screening interview. And that will give you so much more clarity on what a resume should do, because by golly, like almost half the battle with any of my clients is fixing their resume. And then the rest is just, well, that's for another day.
Yeah.
Got to keep something in this.
There's a lot more, right? Yeah. Well, speaking of that, let everybody know where they can find you, because, guys, if you're not already, again, if you're not in contact with Chris or you're not following him on LinkedIn, big mistake. Tell them how they can fix that.
I mean, just Chris Tran, gaming career coach on LinkedIn, or my website is christran.gg. I am starting the website journey. I'm not good at it yet, but then we all start somewhere, and I'm also very sanguine and humble about that.
I get it.
Because if I'm waited until I'd be perfect at it, then there will be no website.
Yeah, I get
This is how I've been doing this LinkedIn thing for a year and a half, and I cringe at what I was at a year and a half ago. And I think in a year and a half, I will cringe at where I am now, bit by bit.
I bet you're right, man. I believe it. Well, hey, listen, my friend, thank you again so much. I really appreciate it. I will be reaching out to you at some point in the future to do this again, man. So get ready. This has been great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate you, bro.
All right, man. Take care.
Take care.
Episode 10 of the Game Industry Job Hunt Podcast. I really appreciate you checking out this episode. Thank you again. I hope you got a lot out of it. I hope you got as much out of it as I did, because I felt like that was an incredible conversation with Chris Tran. Make sure to check out Chris on LinkedIn. Find him there. Connect with him. Feel free to find me and the show on LinkedIn. Search Joe King. That'd be me. Send me a connection request if you want there. And you can also search for Game Industry Job Hunt and follow the show on LinkedIn as well. Get all the updates. In the meantime, keep pushing. Good things are going to happen, and we'll talk to you soon.